Traoré has gone from being a career soldier to the leader of the West African nation, declared leader of Burkina Faso. He overthrew the president, Paul-Henri Damiba, alongside a group of soldiers.
Soldiers overthrew President Paul-Henri Damiba. It was the West African country's second coup this year.
What if the world's youngest leader rose to power through controversy but revolutionized an entire nation? Ibrahim Traoré's nomination for the Nobel Peace Prize isn't just shocking, it's rewriting what leadership means today. Stay tuned to uncover why this coup leader turned global inspiration could be the symbol the world didn't know it needed. What happens when a 34-year-old military officer seizes power amid chaos and begins rewriting the rules of governance? That's exactly what Ibrahim Traoré did in the fall of 2022, taking over the reins of Burkina Faso through a coup that shocked the world. At first, the news was met with immediate condemnation from Western nations, who labeled him everything from a power-hungry opportunist to another textbook case of instability in Africa. For them, another military leader meant more unpredictability, another potential dictator who might exploit his position for personal gain. Yet, on the streets of Ouagadougou, it wasn't anger or despair that met Traoré's rise. It was something far less expected: hope. To many Burkinabe citizens, Traoré wasn't just another soldier in uniform. He represented a glimmer of possibility in a country that had been crushed by years of economic stagnation, relentless insurgencies, and widespread disillusionment with traditional political systems.
Power has emerged. Burkina Faso's battle against groups linked to Al-Qaeda and Islamic State is likely to be a focus. Lost patience. Burkina Faso's new military leaders say Damiba refused to reform the army. Russian flags have been waved in the street, and Russia has expressed support for the coup, just as Western powers were condemning it.
Burkina Faso, once seen as a beacon of revolutionary ideals in Africa under Thomas Sankara, now stood as a shadow of its former self. Jihadist violence had claimed thousands of lives. Nearly half the population lived on less than $2 a day, and political corruption seemed to entrench the struggles even deeper. It was in this simmering pot of resentment and despair that Ibrahim Traoré's message first resonated. He didn't promise glossy fixes or vague reforms. Instead, he positioned himself as a leader who would break ties with systems that colonized not just land, but the spirit of his people. Think about this. One of his first sweeping decisions as leader was to refuse further loans from the IMF and the World Bank. These institutions had long supported Burkina Faso's economy, but at a steep price. Decades of repayment had tied the country's future to Western interests, often forcing the government to prioritize external obligations over internal growth. Traoré's rejection of such loans wasn't just financial, it was symbolic. It sent the message that he was steering Burkina Faso away from external control, signaling a pivot toward internal solutions crafted by and for the people themselves. It wasn't only about refusing the terms of the IMF, it was about questioning why decades of dependency hadn't yielded meaningful progress for everyday citizens. But if shunning financial aid raised eyebrows, his decision to ban French mining companies outright sent shockwaves. For decades, French firms had dominated the mining sector in Burkina Faso, extracting gold and other resources while providing relatively little benefit to the local population. Traoré's administration accused these companies of exploiting the country's wealth without reinvesting in its development. By cutting ties, Traoré gambled everything on his vision of reclaiming national sovereignty. To many outside observers, it seemed reckless. Yet to his supporters, it was bold, a refusal to continue business as usual under a system that left Burkina Faso's raw materials enriching others while its people remained destitute. And perhaps that boldness is where Traoré's story takes its most interesting turn. Many who initially doubted his leadership wondered whether his fiery rhetoric of independence would translate into action. However, his domestic policies quickly demonstrated his determination to walk the talk. One of his earliest initiatives was nationalizing the distribution of food supplies, an essential move in a country where instability and hunger often went hand in hand. By redirecting resources away from corrupt intermediaries and directly into the hands of local communities, Traoré's government worked to ease worsening food shortages in a way that prioritized Burkinabe families over external markets. It wasn't just about food. His administration took visible steps to reinforce its message of self-reliance, leveraging Burkina Faso's existing resources to support grassroots programs. He poured funding into agricultural cooperatives, encouraging farmers to pivot towards sustainable crops that could feed their own communities rather than rely relying on expensive imports. These decisions didn't just mark a rejection of global systems, they laid the groundwork for a nation attempting to rebuild from the inside out. How then did the young leader once accused of staging a power grab come to be considered for the Nobel Peace Prize? That's precisely what makes Traoré's story so compelling. His vision, criticized as impractical and overly radical at first, has slowly won over even some of his harshest critics. The policies, abrupt and disruptive as they seemed, weren't about immediate comfort. They were about laying a foundation for future stability. His actions reflected a leadership that didn't seek validation from the international stage, but from those at the heart of Burkina Faso's struggles. Perhaps the most telling transformation has been the shift in global conversations. Western commentators who initially dismissed him as yet another military figure now find themselves grappling with the tangible impact of his grassroots approach. Leaders around the global south have also started looking toward Traoré's policies as examples of what assertive local governance could achieve in a world dominated by economic giants. The youngest leader in the world wasn't just playing politics, he was reshaping it. Still, the story doesn't end there. Early steps, though inspiring, are only the beginning. How did initiatives designed to reclaim sovereignty evolve into real changes for actual lives? What turned Traoré's bold gambles into something more than symbolic victories? Those answers lie in his next chapter, where military strategy gives way to the work of rebuilding a nation in profound, unexpected ways.
Burkina Faso is making great moves, and this is all thanks to young leader Ibrahim Traoré. Recently enacted by President Ibrahim Traoré, significantly restricts foreign ownership of rural land, aiming to strengthen land governance and ensure the state maintains control over national resources.
Traoré's vision of empowerment extended beyond nature to the very ground people walked on. His administration made headlines by returning nearly 4 million hectares of land to local farmers, land that had long been exploited by foreign corporations. These were hectares of fertile soil reclaimed not in the name of profit, but in the name of those who worked it. It sent a powerful message, as if land itself became a metaphor for Traoré's philosophy. Burkina Faso would no longer accept being mined for resources by outsiders, while its own citizens went hungry. His critics called it reckless, questioning whether the nation could afford such bold moves. But the results were impossible to ignore. Farmers tripled their crop yields, markets flourished, and the country's reliance on foreign imports began to shrink.
Incredible news, considering how a lot of African countries to this day don't have majority of the land ownership, recognizing customary land rights of indigenous communities and allowing long-term leases for agricultural purposes. That came in and colonized the locals, the indigenous people, took over and for the most part didn't return it.
But perhaps the boldest and most unusual aspect of Traoré's leadership was how he chose to confront violence. Instead of solely deploying more soldiers or escalating military operations, he turned to dialogue. His government introduced reconciliation programs aimed at former insurgents, people who, months earlier, had taken up arms against the state. Through initiatives that offered amnesty and vocational training, Traoré challenged these individuals to exchange their weapons for tools, their battlefields for farms. Village elders acted as mediators, fostering conversations that prioritized healing over conflict. Slowly but surely, former fighters began reintegrating into society as farmers, masons, and tradespeople. The results spoke for themselves. Violence noticeably declined, and previously war-torn regions began glimpsing what peace could look like. These transformative efforts didn't stay under the radar. Around the globe, leaders began to take notice. Burkina Faso was a country many had written off, seen as a battleground more than a success story. Yet Traoré's policies began reframing conversations, particularly about what post-conflict leadership could mean in countries striving to reclaim sovereignty and rebuild from the ground up. France, Burkina Faso's longtime colonial ruler, acknowledged progress, even as relations remained tense. Meanwhile, the Vatican made headlines by endorsing Traoré's Nobel nomination. Pope Leo XIV's statement captured the essence of Traoré's approach. He builds not cathedrals, but futures. It wasn't the material grandeur of his achievements that stood out, it was their deeply human impact. Ibrahim Traoré's journey challenges the world to rethink peace and progress in profound ways. His leadership rejects traditional notions tied to ideology or external dependence, opting instead for tangible action rooted in the needs of his people. By prioritizing sovereignty and empowering grassroots efforts, Traoré has shifted perceptions of what governance can achieve, especially in regions long defined by external narratives. As his Nobel nomination suggests, Africa's future may no longer hinge on global validation, but on its ability to chart its own course. If one leader can spark such transformation, what possibilities await a world ready to embrace action over convention?